Hi there, in these next few slides I aim to bring us up to date in all of the countries that we've been looking at. So we've looked at the history, we've compared and we've contrasted the historical backgrounds within the context of the three countries, and now I want to try and bring us up to date in regard to where Ireland currently is, where Britain is, and where Greece is. So this might be a little bit more familiar to most of you, hopefully, and hopefully it'll add to what you already know as well. So, and just to say that again, I will give a brief of each of the three countries of where we're at now, but in the three readings that I've given you, which you will have hopefully already looked at, you get a more in-depth look at the context of where Ireland, Britain and Greece are. So I'll just point out a few of the key pieces in regard to where the three countries are now. And also I just want to say, in regard to your assignment, I'm conscious as well that you're asked to look at, for this module, the approaches and the models. So in the next session 7, I'm going to be highlighting 4 particular models or approaches, as they can also be called, to youth work, and that will hopefully support you in your assignment. So just bear with me for that next session, okay? So as I said, the next few slides will look at where Britain is at the moment, where Greece is, and where Ireland is, okay? So we start with Britain. So Britain, like we said, in the 1960s set up its statutory youth service and was known as the golden era, the golden age of youth work. And youth work became a professional endeavour. But as with everything, and I know I had a discussion in regard to where the British government is presently at the moment and some of the changes that it's making to its educational system. I know I talked with you about that, Nikki. As with changes in government and changes within parties in government, new legislations are introduced, new acts are introduced, and some are also taken away. So in 1997, Labour government came into power, and one of the key influences in regard to Labour government coming into power within a British context was the fact that one of the key influences it had on youth work was that it started to bring youth work, without getting into the nuts and bolts of it, it essentially started to bring youth work down a route of doing the one-to-one, the more specific, the more targeted work. So whereas Britain had been working with, or had tried to work with all young people in the professional endeavour of youth work, it now started to reel this back in and started to look at youth work being focused upon more targeted youth work. So particular young people, particular groups of young people. And as we know, when we talk about particular groups of young people, generally this means the socially disadvantaged, the economically disadvantaged, those that are part of the working class and are seen as in need of that extra help, as opposed to all young people just being part of youth work and being able to engage in youth work. So this move towards the more targeted services happened from 1997. And as I mentioned the last day, where this went to in the early noughties, so around the 2003, 2004, 2005, early to mid 2000s, the statutory service in Britain was essentially disassembled, so taken apart, and how youth work was being run was reorganised. So following on from this, one of the influencers, as this was happening, as across the world globally, what happened was the process of austerity measures came into many of the countries within Europe. So austerity measures brought massive cuts within a British context. And what we saw, and I add a few readings as well up on Moodle in regard to this and the context of this. So what we saw happening was that youth work and youth work services be a process of contracting out work to private organisations began, so that the state slowly started lessening their responsibility by essentially tendering out contracts to private organisations to take on youth work, but not just universal youth work for particular young people, again, for particular targeted young people. So essentially the government were outsourcing youth work, putting a price in it, and whoever sent back the best tender, the best price, they would get the contract. So it was essentially this business model of supporting youth work that the government began engaging with. Okay, so a process of commissioning and contracting. So essentially the state were handing over responsibility to private contractors to carry out youth work. Okay, so this might sound a little bit familiar as well in regard to the Irish context at the moment and what's happening in the Irish context, but I'll come back to that. So there was an emphasis, like we said, on targeted services, and we saw youth work in Britain from the mid to late noughties, 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Youth workers being employed in residential care services, in information services, and in work with identified individuals and families. So again, the family support workers. And people who went into this from a youth work background weren't, the actual youth work and youth work processes themselves weren't as acknowledged as they were part of it, and a big part of it, but the big part wasn't the youth work process. The big part was the agenda that was coming behind these services being set up, so that we try and help the families, support the families, or that we work with young people who are now in residential care, but the actual youth work wasn't the emphasis, or wasn't the focus, the acknowledged focus. It was trying to tackle some of the issues that were being highlighted within a British society at that time as part of a consequence of all the cuts that were happening. So it was, I suppose, to be simplistic about it, trying to bring in youth workers to do jobs that were being posed by a welfare state. So bring youth workers in to try and fix some of the issues that were there, and attend to some of the issues that were there in a family support context, or in a residential care, or in a justice context. Okay, so some of the questions that would come out from that would be, how is the youth work process to be at the core when youth workers had to try and contend with the more immediate issues, such as young people getting in trouble, or families needing extra support in their lives. So there's some questions around that. Where was the youth work process placed when youth workers were put into those more immediate contexts, okay, that were essentially for, I suppose you could say, social care workers as opposed to youth workers. So moving on quickly, I'm conscious I don't want to go on too much about that, and there is similarities in an Irish context. So in Ireland, again, as in Britain, youth workers are employed. So we have the Youth Work Act, which is quite distinctive and quite progressive within Europe. But we actually have a Youth Work Act, as I spoke about, which came into force in 2001, and there was a move from youth work from the Department of Education to the Office of the Minister of Children and Youth Affairs within the noughties. And then again, so like Britain, we had the economic recession and we had austerity, and this hit, and this caused massive cuts. And again, youth workers, a process of youth workers being pulled to attend to more immediate issues happened. So like we see now, we have youth workers as youth justice workers, we have youth workers as specific drug workers, we have youth workers as family support workers. Some of the questions again that come from that is, how much are youth workers acknowledged and the youth work process acknowledged, as opposed to the immediacy of them just trying to keep children out of trouble, or children away from addiction, or helping supporting families with their more immediate issues. In 2011, we had the setting up of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, which consolidated a range of functions once undertaken by various government ministers. So a process of so the department, under the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, you have children living in care, you have early childhood, you have a place for youth work. All of these are under the one department, which is really beneficial because it lends itself, or you would hope it would lend itself to a more networking approach and better lines of communication amongst what's happening for the young person in an Irish society. So whether that young person is in residential, whether they're engaged in youth work, that there's more communication going on between the different sectors, so that one young person would have more communication happening around their welfare and where they come within the Irish society. So the purpose, like I said, of the consolidation was to be able to coordinate youth policy and legislation decisions pertaining to children and young people under the one umbrella. Sort of similar as we'll see as to what has happened in Greece as well, that under the Secretariat of Youth, youth issues come under that one umbrella. So, and you can look at the Youth Affairs section for Ireland under dcya.gov.ie if you want to look further into that. So within a Greek context, then, just to recap there, we had the foundation, and I didn't mention that in the last session, but that the foundation, you will have read it in the article that I gave you by Dora Giannacchi. But one of the key turning points was in 1975, the new constitution acknowledged the duty of the state to protect youth. I just think I briefly mentioned it. And from this, as I said, there was the foundation of the General Secretariat for Youth in 1983. So two of these were key turning points within the Greek historical context in regard to youth and young people. And youth work, as opposed to Ireland, doesn't have a definition, as it doesn't in a British context either. But in Greece, what youth work is seen as, it is acknowledged as a social practice. And obviously, I know the Greek students watching this and looking at this now obviously know a little bit more in regard to this, so just bear with me, I'm just skimming over this. So the Secretariat, a little bit like the DCYA, the Department of Children and Youth Affairs in Ireland, deals with not so much youth work specifically, but does deal with youth affairs within the Greek context. So it looks at things like, for example, youth employment, sport for young people, education, family, military, deviant behaviour, media and participation. So these are some of the issues that this General Secretariat for Youth looks at. So it works with, sorry about the size of that, right, I meant to make it a bit bigger, but it works with young people, predominantly 15 to 25 within a Greek setting, whereas Ireland and Britain would be the 10 to 25. So Greece has more of a focus on that the older group of young people, I suppose, after 15, but in particular cases, it does also acknowledge particular work with young people, maybe around the age of 13 to 14 as well, in particular cases. However, there's no official definition or legal framework specifically concerning youth work. So it does work with youth issues, it does acknowledge a state responsibility to protect youth, but there's no legal framework in regard to youth work specifically. But there is a range of activities described as youth work. And also, just to come back to training, so there's no specific training to youth work as there is in Ireland and Britain. So in Ireland and Britain you have NSETS accredited training, which it gives a framework for the degrees of youth work in Ireland and Britain, okay? So this is National Standards in Education and Training, National Education, North-South Education Training Standards, and this people can get a degree which is accredited by NSETS within Ireland, within an Irish and a British context, and we have colleges that run these, whereas in Greece at the moment you can't get a specific degree to youth work, but you can get qualifications that are aligned with that, such as in social work and other pedagogies and education. So as you can see there, youth affairs is overseen by a variety of contexts, which you can read about a little bit more in Giannacchi's article. And again, also, like that, Greece were also, as we know, has been severely hit by the global economic context as well, and has seen things, cuts, has. So just have a look at this and look at the quiz at the end.